A biblical perspective on life, culture and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
I wonder if you've ever considered just how important it is that Christian radio broadcasts are happening in some of those war zones around the world. Well, we're turning our attention again today to Ukraine, and there's also a ministry that's happening in Russia, where the work of FEBC, the Far East Broadcasting Company, is active and working autonomously with both sides of the conflict. But it's in a war zone where people suffer the grief and loss of loved ones, displacement and PTSD, where people are traumatised by war. You might imagine that the radio is very important to people who are going through such very difficult times. Janet Cousens is back with us today. She's CEO of FEBC Australia. Hello, Janet. Welcome back to 2020.
Hi, Neil. Thanks for having me.
Janet, you were recently in Ukraine. You visited some of those Eastern European nations, some of the stands, Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan, and they've got their own issues to deal with as well. But from actual war zones, your connection closely with people of Ukraine, you learned a lot while you were there.
Neil, it was an incredible privilege to be able to meet for a short period of time with FEBC's team in Ukraine. They're an inspiring, professional, passionate group of Christians who themselves are living in the war zone and who have a dream to bring hope to the people of their country.
Now, what sort of issues did you come across? I wanted to focus today on some of the real challenges about what Christian radio provides for people who are going through the toughest time of their lives, where they actually need the sort of comfort that comes from the gospel, because they're going through such a hurtful, destructive brutality of being victims of war. Christian radio in that context has to be very valuable, doesn't it?
Christian radio is a lifeline for many of the people in Ukraine and in other wars. Neil, there's over 150 armed conflicts in the world today. So I just want to acknowledge that, even though we're speaking specifically about Ukraine at the moment. And one of the things I learned from talking to the broadcasters there is that the most important thing that they can tell listeners is that they are there with them in the war zone. They themselves, the broadcasters, are waking up with bombs falling down the street. They have no electricity for certain parts of the day. Every member of the FEBC team has lost either a family member or a close friend. 6 of their team have been conscripted to the war. So it's very present every minute of their day. And to be able to empathise and to tell the listeners that they understand is one of the most important things that they're able to offer in terms of bringing comfort.
And of course, I mentioned that FEBC operates in Ukraine, but there's also I guess you'd call it sister organisation. Now, FEBC's been working in Ukraine and in Russia for decade upon decade upon decade. And then war breaks out. All of a sudden, there's a big wedge in between because you can't be accused of sharing secrets. They do operate autonomously.
FEBC Ukraine and FEBC Russia operate autonomously. However, they share an overarching umbrella ministry in terms of the purpose of FEBC around the globe, which is to bring the love of Christ to people who are yet to know him through media.
And while your connection has been with the Ukraine outfit, should we assume that FEBC functioning in Russia will also be dealing with some or many of the same types of things because so many Russians will have lost loved ones too on the front lines of the war?
That's right, Neil. Early in July, I had the opportunity to meet with 2 of the team from Russia. I met with Alexei, who's their head programmer, and Oleg, who's the head technician. And they shared with us that the people of Russia are increasingly disillusioned with the war. They themselves, as you've said, have lost loved ones, don't know when their family members will be conscripted. They are going through as much hardship as people of the Ukraine are. And they urged us not to forget that, to continue to lift their needs in prayer as well.
Last time we were talking, you were sharing about some of the team. Now, when we talk about a broadcast team, 7 FM stations across Ukraine, and people who are creating Christian content that's meeting some desperate needs of people who are going through all of this conflict and the hurt and the trauma of war. But you'd lost something like 7 of your staff conscripted to fight on the front lines, and that's left a big hole. And I guess there's going to be still lots of people working, creating content, but I guess losing those people is a big loss, isn't it?
It's a big loss and it's a big strain on the team. The focus of the team is to remember that God is with them and God can always provide and God can always go before. So I met this beautiful young woman called Alina who had a dream from God to become a broadcaster. She was connected in with FEBC at about the same time as one of FEBC's broadcasters was conscripted. So while she didn't have that broadcasting experience, she could join the team and under the mentorship of 2 senior broadcasters has filled that morning spot and is sharing the love of Christ across the Ukraine as a new broadcaster. The team are incredibly grateful to God that he continues to provide. Where man might take away, God can provide.
There's one of your broadcasters, he's known as Pastor Sergey, and I've seen a video of him on an FEBC site, and a wonderful man of God, ministering to people on the streets. But he was conscripted, and he was the presenter of one of your key programs.
That's right. Pastor Sergey has been a foundation in the Ukraine ministry since it began, and his program was through the Bible. He led a broadcast that took people through the Bible to build their understanding of what the love of God looks like from the scriptures. Pastor Sergey is serving on the front line as a soldier, and where he can, every week, he continues to deliver that broadcast through his laptop back to the radio stations to continue to minister to the people of Ukraine. What Sergey said to us was his capacity to do that is transformed by his own experience. This is the first time ever in his life, as a lifelong Christian, he's been surrounded by non-Christians. And so he's delivering this ministry with an increased awareness of what it means to hear the gospel for the first time, ever thoughtful of the men around him that may or may not be with us tomorrow.
Isn't that amazing? Because you might think of a media organisation having a correspondent on the front line of a war zone, but your correspondent in Ukraine is a pastor, and he's got a laptop, and he continues to take people walk through the Bible, uploading those programs for air each week and being an encouragement from the front line. That is just amazing.
It is amazing, and he's a beacon of hope for all of us that that can sometimes feel quite pressured about what we can be doing in this space. One thing Pastor Sergey did say to us is that the ministry feeds him as well. His connection into the team in Ukraine and knowing that he can continue to do what God has put on his heart, which is to bring the love of Christ to a people who are desperately in need, not only of the love and peace of Christ now, but of eternal salvation, is something that keeps him feeling safe, keeps him feeling purposeful, and keeps him feeling close to Christ.
Janet, just reflect for a moment for us, because you mentioned there's something like 150 conflicts going on around the world, and most of those never make the headlines because there's only ever 1 or 2 that really dominate world headlines. But FEBC, as one of those international broadcasters, has been broadcasting in something like 145 languages in 50 countries around the world. So you'd have to be across a lot of those sorts of details because, yes, FEBC has feelers out everywhere.
FEBC is broadcasting currently into 50 nations around the world, and the needs of the people that they're broadcasting to differ from country to country. It's one of the unique things about this ministry is that the broadcasters are able to broadcast in the local language with the cultural nuances that mean that they can speak to the heart of the people that they're talking to. As an international ministry, we're also able to share what each country is experiencing and the needs of those people. So countries that are ministering to people at the point of crisis, like those in the Ukraine, can share with other parts of the association to continue to be encouraged and to learn.
And as times change, I mean, so many might be familiar with FEBC and started out to be a shortwave broadcaster and almost covering all of the whole face of the earth. But as technology has developed, you've been able to begin to utilise all sorts of other technological advancements like internet streaming and satellite podcasts. You've got to adapt the way your media ministry works, particularly when you've got war zones.
Particularly in a war zone. In the Ukraine, we started with 10 towers and 3 of them have been blown up. That's 3 broadcasting towers that are no longer servicing that ministry. Thankfully, the Ukraine team were fairly adept in social media and in online streaming, and so they continue every day to put the word out about the love of Christ through whichever media is going to reach the people in the surrounding area. In other countries, FEBC has not been able to get a radio license, either because they're way too expensive or because radio licenses aren't available to Christian entities where Christians are significantly in the minority. And so those FEBC ministries have harnessed all of the goodness of social media platforms and of online ministry, and that's how they're getting out the word of God in those communities. It's particularly effective for younger people. And one of the things I was most excited about on this last trip that I went on to meet with 4 of our partners in Moldova, Ukraine, Kyrgyzstan and Kazakhstan is the passion those broadcasters have for young people who are on social media. Around the world, young people are generally not listening to the radio where they have an alternative. They're on their phones. And so these broadcasters, some of them are young, some of them are your and my age, Neil, some of them are even older than us, are utilising that technology that's been created by man for God's goodness.
And you've got people who are on the radio. There's talk programs that are looking to meet the needs of people who are feeling hopeless because their hope has been taken away. Their homes have been taken away. Their livelihood's been taken away. Their sons and daughters have been taken away, conscripted and taken to the front lines. The sort of ministry by way of like a counselling service, but bringing the hope of the gospel and bringing God's power as a way to intervene into the circumstance of a life that's broken. That's the sort of thing that happens in the sorts of broadcasts that happen?
That's exactly what we can do in a war zone, Neil. So the team in Ukraine learnt in the first year of the war that the majority of people that were contacting the station for help were really struggling with some of the most difficult situations in life. There were a lot of people that were calling in that were suicidal, people who had lost their family members, people who were experiencing domestic violence with the increase in stress across the community. And so FEBC Ukraine has set up a counselling team. They now have 16 professionally trained Christian counsellors who respond to the callers that are phoning into the station and who also message with people who are contacting via chat or by text. And they make a discernment about how desperate those people's needs are. If it's suicidality or something very extreme, they would work with those people themselves and refer them into specialty services. If it's people that are needing comfort, then they would link them into volunteer counsellors from the churches and, where possible, bring them into a local church community. The team has recognised that in a war zone, whilst our primary role is to bring spiritual light and spiritual help and the love of God, we have to do that alongside recognising the psychological needs of people and often the physical needs of people as well.
So significant, providing that sort of comfort and inspiration that people in a war zone need. And it's not just a few. It's a nation in grief, a nation that's feeling the trauma of war, a nation that is in a dreadful state of hurt. To connect with FEBC, you might want to check in with Janet Cousens. Janet is the CEO of FEBC in Australia. And the website address is febc.org.au. And you might want to become a prayer partner. You might subscribe to a newsletter. You might want to be a financial contributor. You'd be invited to do that. And I know that with the people of Ukraine not wanting to be forgotten, but remembered by people like us here in Australia. febc.org.au. Janet Cousens, thanks so much for another update today on 2020.
Neil, thank you for inviting me in today.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.